What is impossible? Question. So it sort of follows two Australian expats who meet at Oxford University. One of them is a first year music student, and one of them is in their third year studying languages. I don't know why I said there. It's a queer story. And they fall in friendly love at first sight, and you sort of watch their friendship maybe become something more as they sort of question everything 28 times and more. And over 4 years through the different cities that they visit, and then after their degree at Oxford, through to their life in London. So I'll get better at that one day. I think that was a really good question. It was very hard to describe one's own book. Very challenging, so well done. So in terms of the title, 28 questions, it's related to questions on it. 36 questions to fall in love. That's a classic thing where you look someone in the eye, you go through 36 questions, and apparently by the end you're soulmates. So just to get the evening going, I thought I'd ask you the first one. Given the choice of anyone in the world, whom would you want as a dinner guest? I just did that. Yeah. I feel like there's lots of right answers. I think I'd like to have Mozart as a dinner guest. Because he's really weird, and I think that would be really fun. Why is he weird? He was just a bit wild, and he was extremely immature, and then wrote like the most beautiful music ever. No offense to Strauss, solid second, but yeah, that's what a weird character. Okay, all right. What's that? I was not expecting it. I thought you'd just be like, my mum. Mum thought so as well. Okay, so on to the actual questions that I made up. There are some questions that are like, what's the most traumatic thing that's ever happened to you? But I won't do that. Okay, so 28 questions has been billed as a queer when carrying out Sally. So were your motivations in writing a book to write a queer love story, and what did you do to do that? I think you guys maybe have your own thoughts on this, but that people read either to relate or learn, and I think stories about minorities are really important and really beautiful for that reason. And I'm queer, and the story and the characters that I wanted to explore, it made sense for me for that to be two women, and I think there's a lot of interesting things that occur between queer love as well as in straight love, but that's just written about more. And yeah, in terms of the When Harry Met Sally, I think I'm really interested in the different relationships we have with people, and kind of the contracts that we write with people in different relationships. So and then what happens when you try to change a relationship format, and why that doesn't work. And this question that was haunting me was, why does the perfect friendship not necessarily translate into the perfect relationship? So yeah. And I mean, a lot of queer novels grapple with this, because I think a lot of queer relationships start in friendship, perhaps more than heterosexual relationships. In terms of the novels and texts that were inspiring in this realm, was there like a cadre of books or popular culture references that you gathered around you as you wrote? There's a book called In at the Deep End by Kate Davies, which I sort of read that and I was like, yep, this is doing all the things that I want a book to do. I don't know. It's a queer love story about a sort of toxic relationship set in London. It's really great and has like very detailed sex scenes, but in a way that's like great. And yeah, I read it after I'd written the book, so it wasn't a sort of text that I drew from, or at least in like whilst writing the drafts. But yeah, I think, but actually, I hadn't read. I obviously look for and search out queer literature, but I hadn't really read like that much. I really like Sheila Heffy's Conversations with Friends. How should a person be? Looking at how people should be. And I think the idea of like growing up and searching for your identity and answering that question is really interesting. So that book really got me. And then so within the book, some of you may have read it, some of you will read it later. It says a grouping of texts that the protagonist finds like emotional touchstones for her as she goes throughout her life, and throughout the 4 years, 5 years of the novel. So the Sheila Heti, you did 4. Yeah. I'm not wearing my glasses. So, so the Sheila Heti, there's Ali Smith, there's Zadie Smith,
yeah, have I missed a big one? No, thank God. Okay, so in terms of those novels, I see them as kind of quite thematically linked. So can you talk about how they resonated for you and then how they developed in the world of the novel?
Absolutely. So Ali Smith is queer, and she's mentioned once throughout the novel, but in a way that I think is really beautiful, because it's looking at this like tension in the way that we communicate in words. And she writes like, you can, this is not a quote, but it is the summary. It is like, you can never control exactly how a person's going to feel with like multiple words. They're always going to read one word at a time, and what you read second is always going to be affected by what you read first. And I think in terms of communication and how friendships and romances function, you know, if a friendship does turn into a romance, it's always going to be affected by what's before it. So that's sort of thematically linked, but then the character's also a musician, and when you play notes, you don't have to play them at a time, and that's really beautiful. And her trying to sort of play the notes of friendship and romance simultaneously, I think, is kind of what she was trying to do throughout the novel. So that's the sort of Ali Smith side of things. And I think Sheila Hesse and Indyana are similar in that they are exploring humankind and like lots of questions, millions of questions. And obviously they're both also fiction, so set in very real times. And I think I really like reading something that feels really, really real. And I obviously share characteristics with the protagonist of this novel and also the settings. And I really wanted to sort of kind of put people in a world that felt really real. That's why there's literary references and musical references that you can really like live with those characters, because yeah, that's I think really can be really beautiful, and it's really cool to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean, just for me personally, because like I also studied in Oxford, and there's a lot of set in Oxford. Just the cafes, like the cafe with the bike shop above it, it just felt like I was there again. It's very beautiful and sumptuous writing, and you're just absolutely in that city. And then when you move to London, it's a totally different vibe, and the texture changes. I love that.
Thank you.
With Zadie Smith, a huge part of it is joy and pleasure, and the character keeps coming back to what is difference between the two, and am I experiencing it, and how best might I experience it? So can you tell me, this is a bit more personal, when you first read the Zadie Smith essay and why that resonated so hard? So yeah,
no, absolutely. I think I read the essay whilst at university at some point. The idea of the essay is that Zadie Smith sort of differentiates joy and pleasure definitively. So pleasures are things you experience every day, like ice cream, or and joy is something a lot more heart-wrenching. I think Zadie Smith talks about giving birth to but like something that's very so ecstatic that it's almost like not happy. And I think it's really interesting when you think about romance in this context, because I think a lot of people, I certainly as a younger person, wanted relationships with joy, not just giving birth. But then that idea, and actually I think a lot of like more mature love is about pleasure, and it's kind of interesting watching the character grapple with this as she's in a relationship that has aspects of pleasure but really like joyful moments, and how like, you know, how touching that can be, and also how that really can't last. Again, TBD.
Yeah, absolutely. So that links in with what we're talking about in terms of female friendship to relationship trajectories, and the particular rhythms they tend to take, maybe being different to straight rhythms. In terms of the relationships that the protagonist has in the book, there's a few. How did you try and differentiate the textures of those relationships by pleasure and joy, because they are different? The Man on the Train is different. They're all kind of different variations. What was in your mind when you were trying to vibe each one out and make them separate?
No, that's really interesting. I think the character is very much searching for joy in relationships, and I think she locates joy a lot in homosexual relationships and queer relationships. And because there's something kind of overwhelming about that, especially initially, especially at 18 when we read her, and it can kind of really over like take over your life. And so much of the book is just like these two characters, and you know, they are so sort of influential on one another. And it's interesting because she then has this interaction with a guy on a train. No spoilers, but it's a not a joyful interaction, right? Like she doesn't give birth. I'm joking, but she doesn't. It's an interaction that is like, nice, and she kind of likes it, and that's weird, right? Because that's not what she's looking for in romance. So yeah, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's allowed.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to move then to settings, which I touched on briefly, but we'll now do more. The protagonist and I moved from Sydney to Oxford and to England. Oxford is in England, by the way. And a huge part of it is the cultural tension and the cultural differences that she's experiencing at that time, which I certainly experienced, and I'm sure you did too.
Yeah.
So what were the kinds of things that you wanted to explore in terms of national identity, being from somewhere else in the world, and also existing in that highly pressured, sometimes toxic and sometimes wonderful environment?
I think so. I think for me, a big part of it, especially initially, was actually just thinking of a character who's 18, who goes and lives in another place. Because that's not so, that doesn't happen so often with Australians, I think, in the way that it's kind of normalized more in the States and in Europe. And that's really weird, right? Because you're suddenly faced with adulthood without your like family support unit. And you think like, how far is the furthest person who loves me? Oh, anyway. And I was too deep. I'm just joking. So I think that was one side of it, actually, this character being really far away. And obviously language isn't a barrier in a sort of, you're not speaking German, but it is. Like you have really different ways of communicating and really different cultural touch points. Like if I sing them through like an Australian,
how to make gravy. They don't get that.
I don't get that. I was thinking, finding square house. And it's kind of weird. And so what I just tended to notice, that's the interesting thing, is that people from the same country who were expats really like got on. And friends of mine who were from Hong Kong ended up either dating or really befriending people from Hong Kong. And so I really wanted the characters to also have this thing in common, because I think that really adds to the language that they have at the beginning of the novel. And in terms of Oxford itself as a setting, campus novels are really interesting. Oxford, I think, is written about a bit, but modern Oxford is not written about that much, and contemporary Oxford, and it's weird. It's a really, really strange experience, and I think I certainly was like, I don't know about you, but I was like not remotely prepared to be in that kind of environment.
I was totally prepared and very poised.
Some people find and so I was kind of interested in also like looking at that and trying to write about that. And also I really love Oxford, and hopefully that comes out in some of the settings. I love that cafe above the bicycle shop, right? Like it's great coffee when you're next to Oxford. But at the same time, I think Oxford kind of in the novel becomes a character itself, and the protagonist has a relationship with Oxford. And I think that's kind of interesting as well, especially if it's like a toxic relationship. It's not a queer relationship, right? Yeah. And so that sort of made sense to me, and then it was kind of interesting that the characters then moved to London, because you sort of see them in a kind of like more like normal, like everyday context. And what do you do after you've been in this weird limbo transient place for 3 years, and then you're suddenly in the real world? And I think that was also an interesting thing.
Yeah, I love that transition, which I said to you, and I want to get to that. But before we do that, I'm like, hold on.
Yeah.
In terms of the intensity of Oxford, or any university, but it's a particular side of the place, is friendships and love and relationships, and everything is heightened. It's all more intense. You're living in the same town as everyone, you're all really close, you're all studying, you're all smart, I think you're smart at least. And I think you say this in the book, everything just happens more quickly there. And so some of the funniest scenes for me, I don't know what this says about me, in the book is when Amalia is making friendships and she invites people over to her little room to have dinner, and she's freaking out because she's 18, she's a kid, and she's like, oh shit, I'm having people over for dinner, like, what do you cook for dinner? Like, and she's like having to call her mum, like, what do I cook? And kind of children playing adults.
Yeah.
And I loved the kinds of conversations that the protagonist and all her friends had, because they're like what we all have when we're 18 and we're stupid, but we're like also big. None taken. Sorry, once again, I was never stupid. But yeah, so in terms of that. But then there's the term that you use, and I might picture this a little, which is the university conversation. Is that it? Nailed it. So the idea of like performative kind of discourse that you do with people when you're trying to impress them and impress each other. So I wanted to talk a bit about that. Was that something that you yourself experienced, and was it challenging or perhaps painful skewering it when you were writing it? Because I was cringing as I was reading it.
Yeah, it's really funny. Some of the comments that I've like seen about it's like, God, they have like really pretentious conversations at the beginning. I'm like, yeah. No, I think it's kind of funny when I have been involved. I think it's kind of nice when you can like look back at something and laugh, which is kind of what this book is doing in that. It's like playing a bit of fun, but also like that. But when you're in it, you are trying to contribute to this conversation. Yeah. No one knows what Bonnie's warehouse is. So I think, yeah, I was like philosophical conversations, like what is desire? When you're 18, sitting around a table, eating adult food that you've cooked. I think, I sort of wanted to play with that, and also I think that's where a lot of like attraction can happen, is like trying to tackle the deep topics. And that was kind of an interesting way in as well, into this, like adding some like texture to this friendship, like whether they agree or disagree on these philosophical ideas. And it's interesting because then you write a book where this character ages, and how do you like, what happens to those conversations, and do you try and have them with like adults, or do you or when you're having dinner parties as a 21-year-old? I don't know if this is real, but you know, what do you then talk about? Or like, yeah, and it's funny because I'm now 26, so much older and wiser than the characters in the novel, and that distance is really, really fun to play with. Especially when I'm 30, and I'll be like, wow, 26 years old.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're now the best we'll ever be. But I think I was thinking about, it was reminding me of Sally Rooney's book, Sorry.
Oh my God, I said it. The new Sally.
Yeah, exactly. She's the new Sally Rooney. But the idea that language can be used as a communicative tool that expresses something, and so you can understand someone else, or it can be wielded as a weapon to impress or beguile or destroy. And one of the questions, because like each of the chapters has a question that's asked to me. And I wanted to read, so one of them is, are all relationships about power? Are all relationships just a quick question, are all relationships about power? So I think you need to, yeah, maybe, I don't know. Should we open this one up to the audience? I think all relationships have power in them, and I think, yeah, you're really asking me this. Cool. But I think the kinds of people who focus on power in relationships, other kinds of relations, like the power, then power dynamics become I think quite like a more prominent aspect of that relationship. I think as well, what I like is there is a power in asking, are all relationships about power? Because what I just did then, yes, but also in the book, but also in the book, whoever is the person who asks the questions is also the person who then doesn't have to necessarily answer them. And so, as a technique, I think it's a really smart thing to do in that context. Exactly. Is that something that you do? No, I don't think so. Not purposefully. Do you think it's something I do? I haven't asked any questions. No, I don't think it's okay. Okay, where are we going? Okay, so we're moving on to London. Okay. We're changing scenes. And accents. And accents. Are we? Can I just do British accent? No, I was about to. Oh, yeah. Sometimes when I talk to British people, my voice becomes British. I don't know what it is. Snobbishness, I think. But yeah, conformity. So the protagonist moves to London. She becomes a financial consultant, which is soul crushing. And that move, I think, is a really important one in the book, because we see someone totally displaced from somewhere where they made all the decisions. Sorry, they didn't make any decisions. Everything was kind of in place for them, and now they're having to work it out. You yourself experienced, you also moved to London.
why was it important for you to shift?
Yeah, I think, well, so many thoughts. I think when I was in that age group, actually, I was talking to a lot of my friends about the fact that it's kind of really, it's like that first year after university, at least in my circles, just kind of wasn't spoken about a lot. And it's really hard. You have just gone through like the most intense period that you're going to have for a very long time. And you have no time to process it, especially if you're living away from home and you suddenly have to support yourself and like pay rent. And I also think that in your early 20s, you're not doing your dream job, and that's really hard. And you kind of don't think about that. I didn't think about that. No offense to the lovely opera company that I worked for when I finished uni, but I think it's a really weird place to be in. And then you have all of this autonomy suddenly, but you also can't really do anything because you need to, you're working like, and and I think there's like lots of campus novels that look at like beautifully a really nuanced, interesting experience of university, and there are a lot of novels about people in their early 20s, and I'm sure there was some novels as well about the bridge, but I was really interested actually in looking at like what that does to friendship and to relationships. I mean, even just being in a different size city, like when you're living somewhere like Oxford and in London, it takes so much longer to see friends, and what that does to friendship. And we used to have like a joke when I was living there where it was like, what is the ratio of like how far I'm going to travel for how long I'm going to spend with the person? And they'll be like, let's go for coffee for an hour. And I'm like, you're 45 minutes away. I was kind of interested in looking at that gap and what it does to identity. Also, like you spend your whole university thinking, like, who should I be? And then you're like, do I have to be someone already? Or
Yeah, no, absolutely. And then also the fact that you went into consultancy after doing a music degree, that's like a weirdly common thing for Oxford arts grads. It's like you've written about Chaucer for 3 years and now you work in a bank.
Very famous of it. Relationships about how
didn't realize I was going to be integrated. That's fine. I had a good breakfast. But I'm in terms of, I was interested purely from a selfish perspective, because when you do study the arts, you want to work in the arts, but that's a rather difficult thing to do. So sometimes you have to make the choice to do things that are not that. So was that something that you were perhaps commenting on, the kind of the precarity of people wanting to pursue their passions?
Yes. No. I think that's like way more eloquently put than I would put it. But yes, no, I think that it's really interesting. And I think like I had a class of 4 people, and like a lot of them become lawyers. And it's just, I think also, it's different in the UK and Australia, but you kind of study whatever, and then you do something, but it's like through studying you learn life skills. And it's really, and arts careers, the way that like payment structures work and like capitalism functions around arts careers as well is something that is interesting. And like, and obviously something I thought about as well. And as an artist and like opera singer and like evenings, I don't know.
Around it.
That's what I opera singer. You put that way more eloquent than that. So the Chaucer comment, I'm trying to climb back.
I never studied Chaucer. Now we're going to look at technical aspects of the novel. Dialogue. So there's dialogue in a whole range of textures in the book. Some of it is just normal dialogue in quotation marks. Some of it, text messages. Some, not Instagram messages actually. But we've got emails, and we've also got handwritten letters. And in each of those realms of discourse, characters are able to say different things. So I wondered if you could comment about the kind of different temporalities and aesthetics of different ways to speak to people across the platform.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's something that's kind of, especially with social media, comes out differently. And I think the way people curate themselves on different social media platforms leads into how they communicate. So Instagram messaging, which doesn't feature in the book, maybe in the future. I think it's different to Facebook messaging and WhatsApp. And I think none of these feature in the novel. But I think it's kind of interesting when people who have such easy access to the digital age want to write letters. Because the things that you want to say in letters, maybe you want to be more permanent or more like heartfelt or loving. And when they're friends in this novel, the 2 main protagonists write each other letters, and you're like, wait, because I think there's something in that. And people are kind of cool over text message, or like purposefully, this is more me, purposefully not cool, and then like kind of seem cool, right?
You're very
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting. So it's the dialogue the dialogue that's happening in like real time. And in the book is written like play script, and I really toyed with the idea of whether or not I wanted to do this because obviously it's quite unconventional, and I knew it would like interrupt some experiences. But thinking sort of about the protagonist and how the protagonist is a very dramatic character. The book's set up in 4 sections, like acts of a play. I shouldn't have to explain, but yeah, and I think views this 21-year-olds take love really seriously, and it's like everything is so heartfelt and almost like dramatized. And so doing play script for me, it kind of made sense that that's how she would think about her past. So and there was none of the like she sighs or she said or she replies. There are not like that many words to use for the everyone else mentions. Yeah, and yeah, I think it's kind of interesting in, for example, Beautiful World, Where Are You? No, I'm joking. The Sally Rooney novel. Every chapter is interspersed with an email, and it's a really beautiful comparative tool to see how these characters speak to each other when they're speaking on the phone, when they're in real life, versus like the kinds of email conversations that they have. And I just think it's a really fun way to write, and also to kind of vary from the everyday dialogue. And if you're reading it with that lens, really lets you into like more on the characters' intentions, I think, than necessarily what they're saying, but
yeah,
what medium.
Yeah, absolutely. And like text messaging can be a particularly like Machiavellian way to talk to someone, because you can then end up the amount of time between messages or whatever.
I have a friend.
She's like, I'm done with that. Yeah. Anyway, no, I thought that was very, very well done. And the other very idiosyncratic element of the novel, which we haven't touched on yet, is the musical annotations throughout. So I'm not a musician. I don't read sheet music. And so for me, what do you originally call that? You just call sheet music excerpts throughout that are kind of like citational emotional addendums to what's going on in the book. And so for me, because I don't read sheet music, I was like, that is a nice idea, but I don't read it. So I was kind of trying to imagine the notes in my head as what they might be, which was actually another interesting exercise, because you then played me the notes yesterday and they weren't what I had imagined, but I don't read music to happen, maybe.
Yeah.
So how did that idea develop? How did music writing happen? And how did you envisage that would affect the reading for people who read music and who don't?
Yeah, I think so. One of the key themes of the novel is differentiating different types of love. It's really weird that we have this umbrella word that means so many different things. I love my mom in a really different way than I love my partner. And my grandfather really good. And I think thinking like Amalia and how this is the protagonist and how she would try and differentiate friendly, romantic, sexual, familial love, it kind of makes sense that she would try and do it musically. And I also thought that would be a really fun challenge. And so she basically comes up with a musical chord that represents different kinds of love. And then around that chord, there's written a description where it's kind of like a friendly love is also stable, like familial love, but a little bit spicier and perhaps not as complete. And with that writing, I was hoping kind of actually that people would have their own chord in their head, that maybe it could be really different from the one that came up with this Amalia, that it would be, you'd hear something and it would add sort of a texture. And then in terms of incorporating this, knowing that some people couldn't read music, I can show you the recordings on my phone. But actually, I think, because I thought about this quite a lot, because I hoped it wouldn't be an alienating aspect. And from what I've heard, I don't think it is. I think, even if it's even just flicking through those pages, it's this is this character trying to do something or coming to terms with something. And I'm hella excited for the audiobook because the music experts will be included as sound. And I think that could be kind of interesting. Didn't have that in mind actually when I was writing this, really. No, I just it kind of makes sense that that's how the character would think, and also so much of the book has these intertextual, text messages, and so it kind of makes sense if she was writing music the same way she would write a text message, and was also sharing the music with the love interest friend character. Then yeah, it was sort of another mode of communication. And again, interesting coming back to that Ali Smith quote from before about music having this ability to say things words can't, obviously vice versa, but I've had to look at that side of things as well. And hopefully with the descriptions and you can hear it yourself in your head. I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a bunny song every
time. Sorry for visually.
But yeah, so the protagonist is studying music. You are an opera singer. Music is a huge part of the book, and I haven't really mentioned that enough. It is, by the way. So in terms of the musicality in your own life and for Amalia, how much do you think the act of writing and the act of music making, should reading a book be like listening to music in terms of feeling, or what are your thoughts there?
I think there are like obvious similarities. It's like storytelling in a way, and music with lyrics and music without lyrics have very different. You and I spoke about the fact that we love Taylor Swift.
That's true.
And I think anyway, and I think Taylor Swift, she writes poetry. I'm a big fan. And then I think there's something that's added to that when you hear it, because she also, I can't get into your head and figure out how you're going to read this with what tone you're going to read and how fast you're going to read this, and a musician that they can. I think that's really interesting. So you could argue there's an extra layer. But also, music happens in real time. So if I've just heard a chord, I can't be like my thoughts. I need to like rest with that chord. Whereas in reading, you can stop, do that thing. And it's kind of interesting. There's a lot more, I think, freedom for thought when you're reading, but also the words are kind of transcripted. So there's a lot more freedom for thought when you're listening, and I can't really imagine writing a book where music doesn't play a pretty strong role. Partly because I love like intertextual feelings, and partly because I think music is such an interesting way to get to know somebody. I can't remember the name of the musical. But yes, it's really to but there's a musical that's come out that a mate of mine who's a brilliant conductor and pianist and composer, he was telling me that each of the characters sing in really different styles, and so a lot of people found that kind of jarring. But actually, the styles of the music reflect the kind of music that the composer thought that character would have on their iPhone. So cool, Leo. Thank you for that insight. But I think music says a lot about a person. It says a lot about relationships, and it's a really nice way to be able to integrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed as well a lot more novelists now releasing Spotify playlists with them to vibe out the characters and stuff.
Yeah, it's funny because I think now we have access to that as well, and I know Jenny, listened to the music while she was reading the book, and that's a really cool experience. And I think I definitely use reading to get to know different. What's Jenny? Yeah. I love using reading and to get to know different books, like as authors mentioned, books or music or art, particularly. I know nothing about art. I love it when other people, Ali Smith is good mention artworks, you can go look it up. And I think it's so cool that reading can be more than just sort of the words on the page, and it can be this like full body thing.
Yeah. I am now going to ask a question that's a very annoying question, and I'm sorry. Which female, debut novelists get asked all the time, and I'm not going to ask that question. But the question that is always asked is, how autobiographical is this? Which one of your friends is this? Is that you? Is that your mom? Did you actually have sex there? Tell me everything. Kind of thing. I did, and it was amazing. But that is a type of conversation that doesn't happen as much with male novelists or with novelists who are more established. And it's often the suggestion that women can't make stuff up, like they're not creative, or that they're egocentric and navel gazers.
That you pointed at me because we chatted about it.
No, because I'm like, but also I don't think that autobiographical fiction is a bad thing at all. So I think that's a weird kind of suggestion regardless. So I wanted to know your thoughts on, not particularly, doesn't have to be about your book, but generally taking from autobiography to fiction. What do you think is that a good process? Is that a helpful process? And what do views about it suggest about how writers and women writers especially?
Yeah, I think that's Thanks for that. That was a really good. Yeah, cool.
Also, did you have sex with everyone in the book?
Everyone. That was laughing because a lot of family characters. Yeah, so I think I've obviously given this a lot of thought because I sometimes finish a novel with like fire. And I was trying to think about why I think that. Like, why is that a book that occurs to me? And it's partly occurs to me because I'm like, I loved this story. So everybody's asking me that. It's just love the story. No, and I've invested so much in these people. Like, wouldn't it be cool if they were real? I think in the same way that we watch films that are based on a true story, and we're like, I think affected more by it. So I think that's like a really nice version of people reading and interpreting that way. There's the like, you're not creative and you're a narcissist version, which I agree with rubbish. And autofiction is like a really beautiful genre that I don't think is nearly amazing or often. Yeah. In terms of, it's interesting to look, I think, a lot of debut writers like myself who share, like, kind of quite obviously a lot of characteristics with their protagonist. I'm thinking of like Megan Nolan, Sally Rooney, Nisha Dolan, like, yeah, and people who are not Irish women. And I think a lot of people in their first novel want to write about stuff that they're like thinking about. So for me, like, yeah, I could have made the main character not an Australian in England, but I wanted to like think about what it was like to be an Australian in England, and I could have made the character not a musician, but I wanted to write about what it's like to be a 20, like, and I think that's kind of what people do, and I think they kind of know that like criticism or that question is going to come up, and they maybe do it anyway because they're like, I want to like explore these issues there, and I think you're right, maybe that like really impactfully about the stuff that you feel really strongly about, and especially as a debut novelist where you've never really had a go at this before, it's a really, really beautiful way into literature, I think. Yeah.
So you're soon to be not a debut novelist, but a second-time novelist. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. There's a second book coming out.
Yeah. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, I can. It's draft one. So yeah, it was, I don't know why I did this to myself, but the first book is set over 4 years and the second book is set over 3 days. Trying to challenge yourself. But it's so cool because it's just like such a different way of writing. And you know, the amount of detail obviously you can get into over a novel for 3 days is like less than the mill. And also like the process of writing, I think was really different writing the first draft of the second novel. It's set in Vienna, which I lived in, and I love Vienna, and I think yeah, I really wanted to write. I also haven't read a lot of contemporary fiction set in Vienna, which is maybe a fault of mine, but I was keen to sort of do that, and also like wrote it during the pandemic when I couldn't go to Vienna. Yeah, but yeah, the writing process of the two are really, really different. I think when you're writing a book set over 3 days, it's really hard to write not chronologically, because every small thing has to link to every small thing unless you really, really match the story out. Yeah, so that was a challenge because I wrote the first book very, if I was feeling happy, I wrote happy scene.
How quickly did you write? How quickly did you write?
I started it in like the first draft of the first book I wrote between March and August of 2018.
Gosh, that's fun.
Yeah, I had a really long commute to my job that wasn't the dream job. I lived in very north London, Harrow, and yeah, was on the tube for an hour and a half a day, no, 2 hours a day, and just wrote on the tube, yeah, every day. It's a really great thing. I write novel, really far from your words. Yeah. I don't know how much to say about the second book, 'cause I'm not sure how much it's going to change for the first draft, but it's also kind of a complicated love story. It's also queer, and yeah, I'm excited about it. I think it will come out maybe in 2024, maybe sooner. Yeah.
Well, there you go. I think that is where we might leave for our questions, but I'd like to open up to questions from the audience or people on Zoom, if that is a thing. I don't know how to use technology, but are there any questions from anyone here? Dad? No questions? All right, you got anything on Zoom? Okay, well, that's interesting. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
Thank you very much for coming. Really, really cool. This is my first event. It's really, really exciting. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for coming. Please help yourselves to drinks and snacks. If you'd like to purchase a book, please just come and find me. And I think if you want to have any book signed, I think you can do the signing here. Thank you very much.